Hello and welcome to the Thecrimereel. Today I will be sharing the story of the bogeyman of Westfield, American John Emil List. John List was born in Bay City, Michigan on September 17, 1925 to John Frederick and Alma List. His father was 66 when John Emil was born. His mother, Alma, was 38 when they welcomed their first child together. Theirs was an extremely complicated family tree. Intermarriage among relatives was fairly common within their small community. John's parents, who were also first cousins, provided John with a very strict upbringing in the house that they owned on South Winona Avenue in Bay City, Michigan. It is reported that John's mother in particular was very domineering and overprotective. At family get-togethers, John rarely played with the other children due to his mother's fear that he would get hurt or dirty. With his father being so much older and passing down old-fashioned views which were not in keeping with the times, John was often the subject of ridicule at school. As a teenager, John spent most of his time alone and had no friends. List was a devout Lutheran and also taught as a Sunday school teacher. In 1943, he joined the US Army and served in the infantry as a lab technician during World War II. This role fitted well with John's precise and exacting personality. He was a bright man, and once the war was over, he attended the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor. Here he earned both a bachelor's degree in business administration and a master's degree in accounting. List eventually met a widow called Helen Morris Taylor, whose first husband was killed in action in Korea. He married Helen in 1951 in Baltimore, Maryland. Helen had a daughter called Brenda from her first marriage, and the three of them set up home in Northern California. Over the following years, John and Helen had 3 children of their own. It is also reported that Helen had become increasingly unstable and dependent on alcohol. After various accounting jobs over the years, John, Helen, their 3 children and his mother Alma set up home in Westfield, New Jersey. John was working as vice president of a bank in Jersey City and appeared to be well respected in his job. At this point, Brenda, Helen's daughter, had married and left the household. From the outside, it would appear that things were going incredibly well for John List. He lived in an opulent mansion, was both a Sunday school teacher and a thriving vice president of a successful bank, with a wife and 3 beautiful children. The morning of November 9th, 1971 started like any other. His 3 children left for school as normal, not knowing that this day would be their last. In the morning during that fateful day, List retrieved both of his guns that he had stored in his garage. A 9mm Steyr 1912 handgun, which his father had given him, and a Colt .22 revolver, which came from his service in the army. Whilst their children were at school, List calmly shot his wife Helen in the back of the head while she was drinking a cup of coffee. He then went upstairs and spoke to his mother Alma while she was eating her breakfast. She asked him what the noise was downstairs. He said it was nothing to worry about. He then pulled out a gun and shot his 84-year-old mother above the left eye. Both his wife and mother died immediately. When his daughter Patricia and son Frederick returned from school for lunch, he shot them both in the back of the head. They were aged just 16 and 13. List then went to his bank and closed the accounts of his wife and mother, withdrawing all of the funds. Later that afternoon, John List attended his oldest son's school as though nothing had happened. He watched his son play in a soccer game and then took him home. When they arrived home, they entered the kitchen, where John Sr. pulled a gun out and shot and killed his 5th victim of the day. Disturbingly, it was later discovered that he actually fired 10 shots into the boy's face and chest to ensure he was dead. John then placed the bodies of his wife and children into sleeping bags and lined them up in the opulent ballroom of their home. His mother was left in the attic room where she had been killed as her lifeless body was too heavy to move. He then cleaned the various crime scenes removed his picture out of every family photograph, and left the house. The murders remained undiscovered until December the 7th, 1971, a whole 28 days since the murders. List had notified both schools and employers to say that the family were all going to North Carolina to look after a sick relative. He had stopped the milk, the mail, and newspaper deliveries, and it was only after neighbours noticed a lack of activity at the house that one of them called the police. In a letter found in his study, the murderer wrote to his pastor detailing how he had seen too much evil in the world. He stated that he had killed his family to save their souls. The police launched a national manhunt to find List. They found his car parked at JFK Airport in New York City, but they could never actually track down whether or not he caught a flight. After the murders in 1971, List actually travelled by train from New Jersey to Michigan and then later on to Denver, Colorado. He settled in Denver in early 1972 and took an accounting job by using an old school classmate's name, Robert Peter Clark. He chose to be known as Bob Clark. In 1972, List was cited as a possible suspect in the famous D.B. Cooper piracy case. He had disappeared 2 weeks prior to the aeroplane being hijacked. He also matched the hijacker's description and was considered a suspect, as many felt that as a mass murderer he would have nothing to lose. However, in later years he was eliminated from the D.B. Cooper theory. During his time in Denver, he joined a Lutheran church, and at one of these sermons in 1977 he met a lady called Dolores Miller. They married in 1985 with List using the alias Bob Clark. In 1988 they moved to Virginia and List carried on working as an accountant. They bought a house in nearby Midlothian and led a normal married life. This, however, was soon about to change. On May 21, 1989, the popular TV programme America's Most Wanted reconstructed the murder of List's family. The show included an expert forensic artist, Frank Bender, who presented a clay bust that predicted how List would have looked 18 years after his crimes. The FBI received over 200 new leads through the show, one of which was from a lady in Virginia that called in to say that List was her neighbour. Less than 2 weeks later, on June 1, 1989, List, still using the name Bob Clark, was arrested in Virginia. He pleaded not guilty to 5 counts of murder while still insisting that he was Robert Clark, not John List. However, early in 1990 at a pre-trial hearing, List's public defender acknowledged that his client was in fact John Emil List. His deceit had finally come to an end. At the trial, List stated at the time of the murders he had severe financial difficulties as he had lost his job at the prestigious bank and his home was on the brink of foreclosure. He had been leaving for work each day to pretend that all was normal. He was defrauding his mother in order to pay the bills and also claimed that he was trying to cope with his alcoholic wife. On April 12, 1990, List was finally convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder. Many people in the court applauded once the verdict was announced. At the trial, the judge said John Emil List was without remorse and without honour. The judge went on to say that after 18 years, 5 months and 22 days, it was now time for the voices of Helen, Alma, Patricia, Frederick, and John F. List to rise from the grave. List was sentenced to 5 terms of life imprisonment to be served consecutively. List appealed his convictions on the grounds of PTSD and inadmissible evidence. However, both of these appeals were rejected. In an interview in 2002, List expressed a degree of remorse for his crimes. When asked why he hadn't taken his own life, he said that suicide would have barred him from heaven, where he hoped to be reunited with his family one day. Ironically, in 1972, a year after the murders, Breeze Knolls, the mansions where the murders had taken place, was destroyed by arson. In the charred remains, investigators found the stained glass skylight from the ballroom of the house. This Tiffany skylight was valued at more than $100,000 at the time of the murders. John List's debts, which by his own admission were a primary factor in his motive to kill, were less than $15,000. Simply selling this skylight could have resolved all of his financial issues. On March 21, 2008, John Emil List died of pneumonia at the age of 82, after spending less than 20 years in prison for his crimes. No one came forward to collect his remains. The monster that had taken away 5 lives in cold blood was finally dead. Well, thank you for listening to this case. I hope you've enjoyed my narration of this story and will hopefully join me for my weekly upload. Please click on the subscribe button and leave any comments or suggestions below. Thank you once again for listening to The Crime Reel. Goodbye.